Hey there, fellow night wanderer. Can't sleep again? Good, because tonight we're going to explore the greasy, flaky, and questionably edible underbelly of medieval cuisine. Forget the feasts in castles or golden goblets of wine. I'm talking about what real people, peasants, merchants, traveling minstrels, grabbed on the go, stuffed into pockets, or devoured at roadside stalls when hunger struck and dignity didn't matter. From deep-fried eel pies to moldy cheese you had to scrape before you bite. This was medieval junk food. So, fluff your pillow, let your eyes grow heavy, and prepare to be lulled to sleep by tales of roasted rat skewers and centuries-old hangover cures. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Can you smell it? The smoke, the grease, the sour sweet tang of something that shouldn't be edible but somehow still is? Good, because that's where we're going tonight. It's just after sunset in a forgotten corner of a medieval town. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with rain and who knows what else. You're tired, you're cold, and more importantly, you're hungry. Not royal banquet hungry, not roasted swan and silver goblet hungry. Number, you want something fast, something hot, something questionable. You want junk food, medieval junk food. But first, let's clear something up. When we think of medieval food, we tend to imagine the high table, where noblemen feast on stuffed peacocks, golden trenchers, and wine that never stops pouring. But that wasn't dinner for 99% of the population. That wasn't you. You, like most people in medieval Europe, lived hard and worked harder. You had no time for pomp, no stomach for luxury. What you needed at the end of the day was something to keep the cold away and the hunger down. Something cheap, warm, and ready to eat with your hands. And so you wandered the streets, hoping for something hot enough to mask the flavor and greasy enough to feel like a reward. And in the smoky alleys of town, you found it. One of the cheapest, most popular street foods of the era was the eel pie. Yes, eel. These were not delicately seasoned nor lovingly prepared. Vendors hacked eels out of murky rivers, rivers that doubled as latrines, and boiled them until their flesh peeled from the bone. Then they baked the meat into a thick pastry crust made from coarse flour and animal fat. It wasn't golden. It wasn't flaky. It was dense and often inedible. In fact, most people didn't eat the crust. They tore it open, scooped out the greasy, steaming innards, and discarded the shell like a medieval takeaway box. It was a meal. It was filling. And on good days, it wouldn't give you stomach cramps. Next to the pie stand, you might find cheese, not soft brie or smooth cheddar. This was cheese that could outlive a war. Some were intentionally aged for months. Others were simply forgotten in cellars. Covered in wax or ash, they were meant to survive winter. But sometimes they came with surprises, mold blooms, insects, and even little worms that locals didn't always remove. In some places, worm-riddled cheese was seen as a sign of quality. It was strong, it was tangy, and it was so hard you could use it as a weapon in a tavern fight. If you couldn't afford pie or cheese, you probably went for bread. But medieval bread wasn't made with love. It was made with whatever grain was available, often barley, rye, or oats, and mixed with water, salt, and sometimes ground tree bark. In desperate times, bakers added chalk, sawdust, or powdered bones to make their loaves heavier. Color meant everything. White bread was for the rich. The darker your loaf, the poorer you were. And it wasn't soft. It was brick-like. You needed a knife, a strong wrist, and teeth that hadn't already been ruined by peasant dentistry. Still, you soaked it in broth or wine. You ate it with hands stained from work, and you were grateful for the weight in your belly. There was also the meat skewer. Imagine walking through a crowded market and seeing smoke rising from a small charcoal fire. A man is turning a spit, and fat drips onto the coals, sizzling into a mouth-watering smell. But what kind of meat is it? No one really says, and you don't ask. It could be mutton, could be goat, could be something else. Vinegar is poured on top, maybe a handful of herbs, maybe just dirt. You bite into it, and it's chewy, salty, smoky, and you don't care, because it's food, and it's hot, and it's not crawling off your plate, yet. Another favorite was the hard-boiled egg, or more accurately, the egg of unknown freshness. Eggs were sold from baskets by vendors who had no interest in best before dates. Some were fresh, others were daring. A good egg would crack clean. A bad egg would hiss, but it was protein. And if you were smart, or just lucky, you got one that didn't ruin your day. And if not, well, that's what the ditch was for. Let's not forget the pottage. This was the backbone of medieval sustenance, a thick, murky stew made from everything and nothing. Whatever was left in the kitchen went into the pot. Turnips, onions, stale bread, bones, dried peas. It simmered for hours or days and grew more dubious with each reheating. Sometimes it was served with a spoon. Other times, just a hunk of wood or a shell. You didn't taste it. You endured it. And when you were done, you prayed it wouldn't come back up. Even sweets had their place in the medieval junk food pantheon. Honey cakes, fig balls, and almond pastries were sold near fairs and churchyards. They were often hard as rock, overly sweet, and sometimes made with ingredients that modern food safety boards would ban instantly. But they were sweet, and that was all that mattered. Sugar was expensive. So was honey. But even the poorest towns had someone selling dried fruit rolled in flour and dipped in syrup. A bite of sweetness in a bitter world. You walked through this world with coins in your pouch and hunger in your gut. And you hoped, more than anything, that what you were eating wouldn't turn on you later that night. Because junk food in the Middle Ages wasn't designed to last. And sometimes neither were you. You've eaten the pie, or at least you've scraped the inside. You've chewed the bread until your jaw ached. You've tested your fate with a meat skewer and the egg. Well, let's not talk about the egg. But you're still hungry. Not physically. You're full. But there's something else, something emptier. A hunger for warmth, for comfort, for a memory that food used to taste like something more than survival. You search again. There's a man frying dough in a pan of bubbling grease. He's barefoot. His fingernails are black with soot. But the smell, hot, sweet, oily, draws you in like magic. You hand him a coin. He drops a lump of flour and milk into the oil. It puffs up. It sizzles. He sprinkles on sugar, if he has it, or dried crushed berries, or ashes that look close enough. You bite in. It burns your mouth. It tastes good. Maybe. Or maybe it just reminds you of something good. You keep walking. The fair is starting in the next village over. You follow the crowds. Vendors line the road, yelling, tossing roasted chickpeas in oil, handing out skewers of gristle and onion. One is selling strips of dried meat cured with salt and ash. Another has sour apples rolled in old honey. A woman gives you a small cup of something hot. It's wine, maybe, mixed with herbs and pepper. You sip it and feel your stomach clench. You nod, thank her, and move on. Your hands are sticky. Your cloak smells like lard, but your hunger has shifted. Now you crave stories, gossip, laughter, and those come best with food. You pass by two men sitting on a log, sharing what looks like roasted mushrooms wrapped in leaves. One looks up and says, "They're good. Just don't ask where they grew." You sit. He breaks one in half and hands it to you. You eat it. It's chewy, earthy, not bad. And then they start telling stories. About a man who ate snail tarts and didn't wake up. About a village where people fried frogs whole and said they cured headaches. About a time when someone tried to make fake meat from moss and tree sap and ended up selling it to a bishop. You laugh, you cough, you almost choke. But it's warm. It's night. And the food, strange as it is, has done its job. Later, as you leave the fair, you see children chasing each other with sticks of something sweet. They call it sugar stone, a lump of boiled syrup hardened into a shape. They lick it until it cuts their tongues. They smile through the pain. One boy offers you a piece. You take it. It sticks to your teeth. It tastes like burning wood and forgotten joy. And yet, you keep chewing, because junk food isn't just about hunger. It's about living, grabbing what you can before the cold sets in, before the work starts again. Before life reminds you it's hard, you walk back to your hut. You lay by the fire. Your stomach churns, but you're smiling, because even in the dirtiest corners of the Middle Ages, people found ways to make the day a little sweeter, even if that sweetness came wrapped in soot and stories. You close your eyes. The last taste on your tongue is salt, ash, maybe honey, and as the fire dies down, your dreams smell faintly of fried dough and boiled wine. Sleep well. Tomorrow there will be more to eat and more to endure, but for tonight you've had enough. It's still dark, but the streets are waking up. You step outside, cloak drawn tight, and the chill meets your bones before the sun ever has a chance. Somewhere, a rooster crows. Somewhere else, a pot is already boiling. Your stomach growls. It's not a request, it's a demand. And so, like many others, you follow the smoke. The market square isn't clean. It never was. But there's comfort in the clatter of carts, the creak of wooden wheels, and the sharp bark of vendors marking their turf. Pork bits and onion cakes. Pickled livers, 3 for a farthing. Hot rat on a stick, still steaming. You stop at the last one. The seller doesn't flinch when he says it. He doesn't smile. He just holds out a charred skewer, and steam curls from it like incense. You look closer. It's meat. That much is true. It's small, thin, roasted unevenly, and glistens with fat. At least, you hope it's fat. You hand him a coin. He hands you the stick. You bite in. It's salty, gamey, charred, a little chewy. It might be rat, it might not, but it's warm, and that's enough. You keep walking. Behind you, the man is already shouting again. Someone else takes your place. The line never ends. You pass another vendor. He's frying something in a flat pan, flipping it with a knife. It crackles when it hits the oil, and the scent that hits you is powerful. Onion, flour, and something burnt. You wait without asking. He cuts the cake in half and gives it to you on a scrap of old paper. It burns your fingers, but you don't let go. You blow, you bite, you breathe through your mouth, crispy on the edges, soggy in the center, mostly onion, barely cake, but it's food, and it tastes better than hunger. Down the street, a boy is selling roasted beetles. You pretend not to see him, but then you hear the crunch. Someone beside you bought a handful and is chewing with a smile. You glance again. The boy holds out a small cone made of rolled bark. Inside, black, shiny beetles. Legs curled, antennae still twitching. He says nothing. You say nothing, and yet you find yourself handing him a coin. You take a beetle. You pop it in your mouth. It snaps. Then it squirts. The flavor is earthy, almost nutty, a little bitter. You swallow hard. He nods like he respects you now. You keep walking. There's a group of children crouched around a bowl. They're dipping stale bread into a thick brown liquid. You look closer. Molasses, maybe, or boiled berries, or tar. You ask what it is. A girl shrugs and says, "Sweet, that's all that matters." You crouch, break a corner of your bread, and dip it. Sticky, clumpy, gritty, but it coats your tongue and makes your jaw work. And for a second, it reminds you that pleasure still exists. Even if you're not sure what you just swallowed, a woman shouts from a nearby cart. She holds up something long and curled, dangling from her fingers. Dried intestines, filled with grain and blood. A sausage of sorts. She cuts a piece and hands it to you on the end of a knife. You chew. It's spicy. The grain has soaked up fat and salt. You don't ask where the casing came from. She hands you a second slice. This one is tougher, drier, but you eat it anyway. You pay, and she nods like she's proud of you. You turn a corner and step into the shadow of a tavern. It's not open yet. But outside, a man is selling something from a pot. He lifts the lid. Steam billows out. It's a soup, or maybe a stew, or maybe something that used to be both. He says, "It's meat, with roots." You don't ask which meat, or whose roots. He ladles it into a clay cup. You sip. It scalds your tongue, burns your throat, but it warms you, and your fingers wrap around the cup like it's gold. It tastes like salt and dirt and bone. You love it. A man nearby is grilling apples, or something that looks like apples. He slices them, sprinkles something brown on top, and presses them into a hot, flat stone. The result is soft, smoky, and sweet. You don't know how old the fruit is. It might be last year's harvest. It might be older. But when you bite it, the skin wrinkles under your teeth, and the flavor fills your mouth like warmth fills your lungs. You close your eyes. You lean against a wall, and for the first time that day, you breathe slow. You open your eyes again. The world hasn't changed, but your belly is full, and you feel a little more alive. You watch the people pass, laborers, children, mothers with baskets. Each one holds something in their hands, something hot, something fried, something questionable, but none of them look unhappy. They chew, they walk, and they keep going. So do you. Because in this world, food doesn't need a name. It only needs to fill you, to warm your fingers, to keep you upright until nightfall. And maybe, just maybe, remind you that life, even in its most brutal forms, still leaves room for flavor, even if that flavor is unusual. The market quiets down by late morning, not because the vendors are gone, but because people's pockets are empty, their bellies full, or as full as they'll get. There's work to return to, fields to cross, fires to build, but not for everyone. Some linger, the ones without a schedule, the ones who work the streets instead of farms, the gamblers, the gossipers, the storytellers. You drift with them, not because you have nowhere to be, but because something is pulling you. The food is finished, but the memory of it still clings to your hands, to your breath. A man waves you over. He's carving something. You're not sure what. It's long, brown, shiny. When he lifts the blade, the cross-section shows a tight swirl of fat and something darker. He says, "It's cat." "Maybe." You laugh. He doesn't. He slices off a piece and holds it out. You eat it. It's tender, smoky, spiced with something that numbs your tongue. You don't ask again. He keeps carving. You keep chewing. The line grows behind you. Next to him, another woman is pounding something with a stone. Seeds? Maybe. Roots? Could be. She forms the paste into a flat disc and sets it on a hot rock to toast. The edges curl. The center cracks. She dusts it with salt and hands it to a child. Then another. You get one too. It's dry, chalky, but it tastes like the earth, like hunger turned to fuel. You keep going. There's music ahead. Drums, a single pipe, laughter that rises above the rooftops. A street performance is underway. Jugglers, fire eaters, a boy pretending to be a dancing bear. But the real crowd is gathered around an old man sitting behind a cauldron. He stirs. He sings. The pot bubbles. Someone asks what it is. He says, "You'll know when you taste it." That's not helpful. But still, the line moves. Each person receives a ladleful into a hollowed-out gourd or cup, or even into bare hands. You wait. He smiles at you. You look like you need a little luck. He ladles out your portion. You sip. It tastes like root, meat, wine, and something else. Something sharp, like vinegar, or regret. You keep sipping. He grins wider. "It's always different," he says. "Depends on what I find." You nod. That makes sense. You drink it all. Someone behind you claps. Not for you. Just for the day. Just because. You move on. The streets twist again. Narrower now. Less market. More shadow. The stalls are older. The people quieter. One woman is selling scraps. Literally. Bits of bone with meat still clinging. Fish heads. Crust ends. Fruit skins. She lays them out in neat rows, like a jeweler. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. People come, they trade. One man hands her a single copper. She gives him a pig's tail, boiled and dipped in lard. Another offers a dried rose. He gets a square of hardened fig paste. You pause. You offer a piece of string. She gives you a lump of something soft, wrapped in cloth. You don't unwrap it. You just bite. It's sweet, then salty, then sour. Then you stop thinking about it. You thank her. She doesn't respond. You walk again. There's a bakery at the edge of the square, or what used to be one. The front wall is missing. Smoke drifts from the open oven. Inside, a woman is still baking. She pulls out flatbread with holes, burnt edges, misshapen. She smears it with crushed garlic and something yellow. It smells like survival. You get one. You eat it on the steps. She nods at you, then goes back inside. Someone sits beside you. You don't know them. Doesn't matter. They're eating a boiled root with salt. It turns their fingers orange. You offer them a bite of your bread. They nod. Trade you a boiled egg. You both chew in silence. This is how friendship starts here. Through chewing. The wind picks up. The market begins to thin. Ash from the cooking fires floats through the air like dark snow. You follow the ash to a cart half covered in canvas. The man behind it is young, but his eyes are old. He's roasting something wrapped in leaves. You ask what it is. He says, "Wild things?" He unwraps one and reveals something soft, pink, flaky. It smells of herbs, of fish, of smoke. You take one. You eat. It melts. You nod. He smiles. No words needed. Further down, a woman sells drinks. Not wine, not ale. Something thicker, sweeter. She calls it berry fire, a syrup made from boiled berries, vinegar, and crushed mint. You sip. It burns. You sip again. It soothes. She hands you a sprig of herbs for your breath. You thank her. Then the bell rings. One loud clang from the church tower. Noon. People start to scatter. The vendors pack slowly. Fires go out one by one. Buckets of water slosh. Smoke turns to steam. You stand at the edge of it all, watching, smelling, remembering. You didn't eat anything fancy, nothing fine, nothing your descendants would put on a menu. But you ate the world today, in skewers and crumbs and boiled broth, in bark cones and broken bread, in laughter shared with strangers, and in silence that tasted like salt. Your stomach is full, or maybe just satisfied. Your hands are sticky, your lips are burned, but you don't mind, because today the street fed you, and tonight you'll sleep with the memory of fire and food and the quiet hum of hunger being silenced. You turn back. The streets are quiet now, but somewhere you know, the next pot is already being stirred, and tomorrow you'll be back, because you always are. It always started the same way, a feast, a festival, a wedding, or just the end of a long week. You drank, and drank, and drank, because that's what you did when you survived another 7 days in a world that barely wanted you alive. Ale flowed like water. Sometimes it was water. Water gone bad, mead, wine, brute herbs, warm, spiced, bitter, and sour. The mugs were never empty, and the night was never short. The fire was hot. The songs were loud. The laughter was endless. And then the morning came. Your head split down the center. Your mouth filled with dust. Your stomach twisted itself into knots and then forgot how to breathe. Your eyes refused to open. Your hands trembled like leaves, and every sound, every movement was a hammer to your brain. Welcome to the medieval hangover. You weren't alone. Everyone had them, from peasants to knights, from shepherds to bishops. The Middle Ages ran on alcohol, and hangovers were the tax, but no one paid it quietly. So they searched for cures, for magic, for anything that would stop the world from spinning and the nausea from boiling. And what they found was creative. The first and most obvious remedy, more alcohol. Hair of the dog, they called it, or at least something close to it. The idea was simple. If alcohol caused your pain, maybe a little more would balance the scale. Just a sip, a gulp. Enough to dull the edge, enough to push the poison a little further down the road. It worked sometimes, until it didn't, until you drank again and again. And then the next morning, well, the cure became the cause, but others took a different path. There were those who believed in purging. Cleanse the body, they said, let the sickness out. And so they turned to herbs, bitter, foul, gut-twisting herbs. Wormwood, rue pennyroyal, mugwort. They ground them, boiled them, strained them through cloth, and drank the liquid warm. It burned going down. And if it didn't burn, it didn't work. Some added honey to make it bearable. Others added pepper or vinegar or both. The more it hurt, the more they trusted it. If it made you sweat, vomit, cry, or all three, success. Then there were the eggs, raw, whole, swallowed in one go. Some people believed a raw egg would seal the damage done by drink. Others believed it soaked up the alcohol like a sponge. It didn't matter whether it made sense. It mattered that it gave you something to believe in while the world wobbled. You cracked the egg into a wooden cup. You stared at the yolk, daring it to move. You tilted your head back. You swallowed, and you hoped. Sometimes it stayed down. Sometimes it didn't. But at least it gave you something else to worry about. Garlic was another favorite. Crushed, boiled, rubbed on your temples, rubbed on your feet. swallowed whole. Garlic was medicine, food, magic, and punishment all in one. Some claimed you had to eat it with stale bread. Others said you had to smear it under your armpits. One monk insisted it only worked if you blessed it first. Another swore that the devil himself feared garlic breath. Then there was the sweat cure. You found the nearest bathhouse or fire pit. You stripped. You wrapped yourself in cloth. You sat close to the heat until your skin dripped and your bones softened. You sweat out the sin, the poison, the shame. Sometimes people added herbs to the steam: lavender, thyme, chamomile. Not for the body, for the nose, a distraction, a kindness, a mask. And if the bathhouse was closed, you buried yourself under blankets and prayed the fever would pass before your brain boiled. Some people believed in music or noise. They banged pans, they rang bells, they sat beside church choirs and let the chants wash over their pulsing skulls. Others swore by silence, days of it, not a word, not a step, just lying still and hoping no one asked you to move. There were also food cures: onions, eaten raw, cut into slices, placed under your tongue, or tied to your wrists. Some said the onion would absorb the sickness. Others said it scared it away. Bread soaked in vinegar, warm milk with nutmeg, black pudding, cold porridge with ashes stirred in, a slab of salted meat placed over your eyes, pickled fish eaten before dawn. None of it made sense. All of it had believers. One popular remedy was to drink the same drink again, but backwards. If you drank mead before ale, you now drank ale before mead. If you ended the night with wine, you started the day with it. But only one sip. Too much would reset the curse. A few desperate souls turned to spiritual cures. Confession. They believed the hangover was guilt made flesh, that by admitting their sins, drunkenness, gluttony, laughter too loud, they could free their bodies from the weight. Others sought relics, pieces of bone from long-dead saints. They held them to their heads, pressed them to their chests. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes the faith helped more than the bone. There were superstitions, too. Walk backward across a threshold. Bite a spoon made of iron. Wash your feet in moonlight. Whisper a prayer into your mug before the first sip. Never drink with your left hand. Always spit once before drinking. Never let your shadow fall across your cup. Each village had its own rules. Break them at your peril. You remembered a man who swore the only cure was kissing a black rooster before dawn. He looked very serious when he said it. You never found out if it worked. Then there was the bucket cure. You fill a wooden bucket with cold water. You plunge your face in it. You hold your breath. You scream into the water. You lift your face and stare into your reflection, waiting to see if it looks human again. If it does, you're cured. If not, try again. One baker insisted on burying his feet in warm grain, said it grounded him, pulled the sickness downward into the earth. You watched him do it once. He seemed happier afterward, or maybe just distracted. And then there were the quiet ones, the ones who didn't drink again, who learned, who suffered once and remembered. But they were rare, because the festivals kept coming, the weddings, the saints' days, the harvests, the bad days, the good days. Any excuse, really. And so the cycle repeated. Drink, laugh, sleep, wake, suffer, cure, or try to. You sat once with a woman who claimed she knew the real cure. She said nothing. She just handed you a bowl of broth, warm, clear, smelling of herbs and thyme. You drank it. You didn't feel better immediately, but your hands stopped shaking. Your eyes opened wider. and you remembered how to breathe. Sometimes, she said, the cure isn't in the potion. It's in the quiet, in the act of being cared for, of being forgiven by someone who expects nothing in return. You nodded, and you finished the bowl. The hangover passed, eventually. They always did. But the memory stayed, of the fire, of the song, of the sickness, of the bowl, and the knowledge that in a world full of pain and rot and strange remedies, sometimes the only thing you needed was someone to sit beside you and wait. Not every cure was taken seriously. Some were jokes that became traditions. Others were half-truths passed around like gossip until someone believed them enough to try. And some were born from pure desperation. You remember one man swearing by boiled frogs, not to eat them, but to keep them under your hat. He claimed the cold frog calmed the heat in the head. No one knew if it worked, but no one wanted to argue with a man carrying frogs on his scalp. Another favorite was blowing into a cow horn 3 times at sunrise. He said it realigned your inner winds. You watched him do it once. He fell over afterward, but claimed it was part of the process. People clung to rituals, little motions that gave them control when their bodies felt like chaos. Chew fennel seeds and spit them into a fire, tie a red string around your thumb, eat bread without chewing, sleep on the floor, head pointed east, look at your reflection in still water and recite the name of your mother's cow. It didn't matter if it worked. It mattered that you did it, that you felt like you were doing something, that you weren't just waiting for misery to pass. In towns with monasteries, people sometimes asked the monks for help. The monks had access to books, gardens, and centuries of wisdom. Some offered herbal teas, infusions of sage, mint, or violet leaves. Some gave blessings. Some just handed you a jug of water and a quiet place to sit. You took what you could. In fishing villages, the sea was the cure. A cold plunge, a splash to the face, a walk barefoot through wet sand, salt air, salt water, salted fish, salt on the skin, in the lungs, on the tongue. The sea washed everything, sometimes even headaches. Some believed the cure was in movement. Run until the nausea passed. Climb a hill before speaking a word. Chop wood until your hands forgot how to hold a mug. Others stayed still, wrapped in darkness, eyes closed, breathing slow, listening to the world return in whispers. Hangovers were personal, and so were the cures. No two people needed the same thing. No two mornings felt the same. The body was a mystery, and the mind even more so. Some drank for joy, some for grief, some because it was the only way to forget the ache in their bones and the hunger in their hearts. You once knew a boy who swore the cure was singing, loud, off-key, and before breakfast. He'd sit on a stool and bellow old harvest songs until his headache surrendered. His neighbors disagreed with his method, but he never missed a morning. Another woman believed in fire, not to warm her, but to frighten the sickness. She'd light a dozen candles and stare into the flames, muttering curses at her own reflection. Then she'd drink cold water and lie in the dark. It worked for her. Some people said prayer helped. Some said prayer was the problem. Still, every village had its own saints, their own favorite prayers for aching heads and trembling hands. Some even had local patrons, Saint Bibiana for hangovers, Saint Vivian, Saint Monica, saints who knew the sorrow of the bottle, or at least were blamed for its aftermath. People carved their faces into mugs, painted their names on doors, whispered their names between gulps. Others lit candles, not for saints, but for memories, for friends who didn't wake up, for the ones who drank too much, too often, too long, for those whose cures never worked. Because not every hangover ended. Some became permanent, a state of body, of mind, of life. And so people feared the line between one bad morning and a bad life. They chased cures with more urgency than they chased the drink. And yet, the drink always returned. It always did. Because the Middle Ages were hard. Work was constant. Comfort was rare. And joy, when it came, demanded celebration. Even if celebration had a price. So people paid it, with aching heads, with trembling knees, with whispers in the dark, but also with stories. You heard them all. The man who ate ashes and swore they tasted like forgiveness. The girl who drank pickle juice and danced in the rain. The priest who brewed a potion so bitter it made men forget their names. The widow who swore by laughter, loud, ugly, belly laughter. She said it chased the demons away faster than any herb. She was probably right. You once watched a man beat his hangover with dancing. He stumbled into the square at dawn, barefoot, shirtless, and wild-eyed. He spun until he fell. When he stood again, he looked new, clean, empty. The next day, he did it again, and again, until people began to join him. By the third week, the whole village was dancing at sunrise, and somehow no one felt sick after. That was the thing about medieval cures. They weren't tested in labs. They weren't written down in books. They were shared, remembered, passed like bread from hand to hand. They were lived, and they were never just about the body. They were about hope, that something, somewhere, could make you feel whole again, that a root, a word, a laugh, a silence, a frog on your head might be enough. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't, but you kept trying, because even if the cure didn't work, the trying was its own kind of healing. You knew that. They all did. You weren't just waiting for misery to pass. You were fighting it, with onions, with vinegar, with rituals passed down from grandmothers who lived long enough to be believed. And sometimes the cure came in silence, a walk in the woods, a seat by the fire, the warmth of a wool blanket wrapped tightly around shoulders that no longer had to carry anything. You saw men sit alone under trees and speak softly to the earth. Women whisper prayers over cups of water, then drink in slow, measured gulps. These weren't recipes. They were confessions. Small moments where they acknowledged their own frailty without shame. There was a tavern near the edge of a trading road. It was famous for its morning drink, a thick, bitter tea made from crushed barley, stale bread, and leftover ale. Boiled together until it formed a sludge. They called it Second Life. Everyone hated it. Everyone drank it. Because by the third sip, your brain cleared. Your eyes stopped twitching. You remembered your name. They served it without ceremony. Just a clay mug, chipped and too hot to hold. You'd sit on the stone step outside, watching the morning fog lift off the fields. Your breath visible. Your shame fading. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes you needed more. There was always someone who claimed to have the true cure, a woodsman with a dried toad sewn into his belt, a midwife who made hangover powder from dried hedgehog spines, a boy who said, if you rubbed your temples with hot bacon grease, the pain would run from your ears and vanish into the wind. You believed them, or pretended to. Not because they were right, but because belief itself was a medicine. It gave you something to wait for, something to laugh about when the ache faded. And when it finally did, you promised yourself, never again, never that much ale, never mead on an empty stomach, never wine mixed with cider, mixed with fermented berry mash, mixed with someone else's homebrew in a flask that smelled like dirt and fire. You meant it, truly, until the next time, because the next time always came. There was always another wedding, another harvest, another night too cold to face sober, another sorrow needing to be drowned, another friend urging one more cup. You said yes, and so the cycle turned. Pain, cure, memory, laughter. And then one day, the pain didn't come. Maybe you drank less. Maybe your body forgot how to warn you. Maybe you just didn't care anymore. But you remembered the cures. You remembered the egg, the onion, the string, the song, the silence. You remembered the firelight flickering across clay mugs and the smell of vinegar boiling on the hearth. You remembered the bowl of broth held by quiet hands. And you knew something strange. The cures weren't really about the drink. They were about being human, about learning to recover, about teaching your body and soul how to find balance again, even when you didn't deserve it, especially when you didn't deserve it, because in the medieval world, mercy came in many forms: a priest's blessing, a friend's patience, a bowl of something warm, or a ritual passed down through muddy roads and smoky kitchens. You didn't always remember the night before, but you always remembered how it felt to be forgiven by the morning. And maybe that was the only cure that ever really worked. It didn't look like much, just a round wheel, speckled with dust and wrapped in cloth. But the smell told you everything you needed to know. You didn't need to cut it. You didn't even need to touch it. You just needed to be near it. And suddenly your eyes watered, your throat tightened, and something inside you whispered, maybe not today. But someone nearby was already biting into it. This was cheese, medieval cheese, not the kind sold in markets with fancy labels, not the kind that melts perfectly on bread, not even the kind you'd proudly bring to a feast. This was the kind that lived, that sweated, that changed color when no one was looking, and people loved it. They ate it raw. They fried it in pans over open flames. They buried it in straw. They soaked it in ale. They let it age until it had opinions of its own. Because in the world of medieval food, cheese wasn't a treat. It was survival, and sometimes a dare. You walked through the village and smelled it before you saw it. Behind every cottage door, somewhere near the hearth, was a bundle wrapped in cloth. It looked innocent, until it didn't. Some were hard as rock. Some were soft as mud. Some cracked when touched. Others moved. You'd seen a wheel once that grew a green rind in the shape of a face. People said it was cursed. Someone still ate it. There were rules. Each region had its own style, its own ritual, its own wisdom. In the north, they pressed it with stones. In the south, they hung it from trees. In the valleys, they buried it in ash. In the mountains, they rubbed it with garlic, wine, or pig's blood. They did what they had to do, because milk didn't last, but cheese did. Cheese was milk preserved by magic and bacteria, and no one in the Middle Ages knew which was which. Sometimes the cheese was fresh, smooth, white, mild. It lasted a day or two. Other times it was aged, black-skinned, cracked, sour, tangy, strong. You didn't just eat aged cheese. You negotiated with it. You once saw a farmer take a knife to a wheel of goat cheese and whisper an apology before cutting. It creaked. He flinched. Then he sliced it and survived. In the monasteries, cheese was a science. Monks experimented, they measured, they recorded, they aged wheels in dark, cool stone rooms and marked the days with chalk. Some became famous for their cheese, others for the smells that escaped the abbey walls. There were competitions. Which cheese could last longest? Which smelled the worst? Which brought tears first? They weren't formal, but everyone knew who won. And when a wheel cracked open and steam rose, yes, steam, people gathered. Someone always took the first bite. Someone always regretted it. And someone always came back for more. Cheese was social. You didn't eat it alone. You shared it. You passed it hand to hand. You dared your neighbor to try. Children were warned not to touch the blue ones, not because they were dangerous, but because they were sacred. Blue meant age. Blue meant power. Blue meant it had survived something. People told stories about the cheese that cured fevers, the one that made a man sing in 3 languages, the wedge that drove a dog mad for a week. No one questioned it, because cheese didn't follow rules. It followed time, and time in the Middle Ages is always hungry. You once saw a merchant with a cart full of nothing but cheese. He traveled from village to village, unwrapping small rounds, letting people sniff. He sold by scent, not by weight. He claimed to have a cheese made during the reign of a king who died without a crown. Another, he said, was aged beneath a battlefield. You didn't believe him, but you bought some anyway. It was sharp. So sharp it cut your thoughts, but it made you feel something. And that was enough. The poor ate cheese as filler. The rich ate it as novelty. The sick ate it as medicine. Everyone else ate it because it was there. There were no factories, no pasteurization, no labels, only guesses and hope. That this wheel wouldn't make you sick. That this slice would go down smooth. That this lump wouldn't sprout legs by morning. Sometimes it did, and sometimes people still ate it. Because in a world without fridges, cheese was both risk and reward. Some said the mold was good for you. Others said it was the devil's fingerprint. Still, the mold grew. White, green, blue, gray, like fog trapped in dairy. You never really got used to the taste. You just learned to expect it. You heard a story once about a man who tried to trade cheese for silver. He carried a wheel across the valley, wrapped in cloth and buried in straw. By the time he reached the town, it had doubled in strength. Not size, just smell. The merchant refused him, but the beggars followed him for hours, asking for just a bite. One said it reminded him of his mother. Another said it cured his toothache. A third swore it scared away the rats. The man went home empty-handed, but smiling, because his cheese had made people feel something, anything. That was enough. Some cheeses were named after villages, some after saints, some after curses. You heard of one called the Howler. They said if you left it near your window at night, you'd hear whispers or screams, depending on the moon. It was banned in 3 towns and still passed hand to hand in quiet alleys. You tried it once, just a crumb. It burned your tongue. Then it made you laugh. Then it made you cry. You didn't try it again, but you didn't forget it either. There were softer cheeses, fresh, crumbly, mild, the kind you ate with herbs or honey or crushed berries. They didn't last, but they didn't need to. They were food for the present, not the future. The hard ones, those were for travel, wrapped in cloth, stuffed in satchels, tied to belts. They went with you on pilgrimages, on marches, on hunts. You chewed slowly, or broke pieces with your teeth, or softened them in wine. Some were so dense they dulled your blade. You didn't mind. They gave your jaw something to do, your stomach something to hold. Children grew up with cheese in their hands, in their pockets, on sticks. They sucked it like candy, swapped it like secrets. Old people claimed it kept their bones strong, strong enough to swing a hammer, strong enough to outlive the rats. In some villages, cheese was currency. Trade 2 rounds for firewood, 1 wedge for a bolt of cloth, a sliver for a secret. It had value, not just in taste, but in time. Because to make cheese, you needed time, patience, a cool place, a steady hand, or none of those things. Some just left it on a shelf and waited. Nature did the rest, sometimes too much. You once found a wheel forgotten in a barn, wrapped tight, hidden under hay. You unwrapped it and watched the mold bloom like a forest. It wasn't ruined, it was ready. You cut it. You tasted. You blinked. It tasted like wood smoke, like old boots, like thunder, and somehow like home. People didn't just eat cheese. They judged it, debated it, praised it, feared it, like wine, like weather, like God. Some said the best cheese came from sheep. Others said goats. Some swore by cows. A few whispered of buffalo. One monk said the animal didn't matter, only the hands. Good hands made good cheese. You believed him. You remembered his smile, the way he cradled the curd, the way he lit candles when the wheels were turned. You remembered the warmth in his kitchen, the quiet bubbling of milk in the pot, the wooden shelves lined with rounds at different stages of becoming. You asked him once how he knew when a cheese was ready. He said, "It tells you." You waited. He added, "But only if you listen." You nodded. You tried to listen. Later, when he gave you a piece, still warm, still soft, you ate it in silence, and you heard it. The story inside. Every cheese had one. A story of grass and milk, of waiting, of change, a story of letting go. That was the truth of it. Cheese wasn't stable. It was alive. It moved. It breathed. It grew. And sometimes it failed. Sometimes it cracked too early, or soured too fast, or bloomed the wrong color. You threw it out. Or you ate it anyway, depending on your faith, or your hunger. You shared it. You hid it. You bragged about it. And when it was gone, you missed it. Even if it stank. Even if it made you dizzy. Even if it crawled. Because it was yours. Your time. Your patience. Your risk. And every bite reminded you of that. You looked in the mirror and saw it. A little mold in the corner of your soul. A little fermentation in your memories. A little sharpness in your smile. Cheese did that. In its strange, simple way. It taught you that decay could be beautiful, that rot could feed, that waiting could reward, and that not everything dangerous had to be feared. Some things were just strong, and strong things stayed. You don't remember when the first cup was poured. Maybe it was at sundown, maybe earlier. The sky had already turned gray, and the fire had already been lit. Someone passed you a mug, heavy, wooden, warm from another hand. You didn't ask what was in it. You drank. It was bitter, or sweet, or sharp, or cloudy. It tasted like earth and time. Someone said it was ale. Another said it was mead. Someone else swore it was both. You didn't care. It burned just enough to feel alive. And so the night began. The Middle Ages drank, not as luxury, not as pleasure, but as necessity. Water was dangerous, wells were dirty, rivers were worse, so they brewed. Constantly. Small ale for children, sweet cider for mornings, bitter brews for workers, fermented honey for feasts. Every village had a recipe. Every family had a secret. The tavern was the heart of the town, more important than the church, louder than the market. You didn't go for conversation. You went because the drink kept you still, because the mug filled your hands and your mouth and your hours. Ale was thick, cloudy, bread you could swallow. Mead was golden, sticky, heavy in the gut. Wine, if you had it, was sour and sharp and smelled like sweat and sun, and it was never alone. With every drink came food, not meals, not plates, snacks, midnight snacks, salted nuts if you were lucky, chunks of bread, torn and stale, smoked meat hanging above the hearth, sliced thin with a dull knife, a wedge of cheese that squeaked when you bit it. Sometimes an onion, raw and unpeeled. Sometimes dried apples, black with time. A pickled egg, a cold potato, a crust of pie no one else wanted. They passed from hand to hand, from bench to bench. One bite here, one bite there. No one asked permission. No one gave thanks. Because at night, under low beams and dripping candles, everything was shared. Not because of kindness, because of need. You sat beside a man who hadn't spoken in days. He handed you a piece of something brown and chewy. You didn't ask what it was. You chewed. You nodded. He nodded back. That was enough. You sipped again. The drink washed down the bite, or made it worse. You couldn't tell. The flavors mixed in your mouth and sat in your belly like bricks. But you didn't stop, because the fire was warm, because the room was full, because silence tasted better when chased by alcohol. And then someone laughed. A joke, a story, a mistake remembered too clearly, and someone else poured more. The mug filled again. You didn't remember finishing it the first time. You raised it. You drank. The room spun just enough to feel real. In the corner, a woman sang. Her voice cracked, but no one minded. Someone passed her a cup. She drank between verses. A child ran under the table, chasing a piece of bread someone dropped. An old man slept sitting up, mouth open, still holding his mug. You chewed another slice of meat. Cold, tough, too salty. It reminded you of nothing. That was good. Sometimes food didn't need to mean anything. It just needed to be there, like the drink. It didn't taste good. It tasted familiar. You drank. Someone refilled your mug. The candle sputtered. You breathed smoke and steam and something sour. You remembered being hungry earlier. That feeling was gone, not replaced, just gone. The drink took it. The food dulled it, and the night blurred it. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the walls held. And the mugs never emptied. The night thickened. The fire dropped lower, but the cups stayed full. You weren't sure who was refilling them. No one ever left, but somehow the jugs never emptied. You saw someone chew on a root. Bitter. Maybe medicinal. Maybe not. He didn't flinch. Just swallowed and looked at the ceiling like it owed him something. Next to you, a plate was passed. Not a plate, exactly. A wooden board, stained, slick, covered in scraps. Someone sliced a piece of cold pie. Meat, maybe. Maybe fish. The crust flaked like dust. You ate it anyway, because it was there. That was the rule of the midnight table. Nothing went to waste. Even the bones had purpose. Even the burnt edges had meaning. The tavern floor creaked with every shift. Someone coughed. Someone else sang off key. A third man swore at a candle for burning unevenly. You drank again. You didn't know what time it was. No one did. Time in the tavern wasn't measured by sun or shadow. It was measured in sips, in bites, in slow, quiet laughter. A woman offered you a boiled egg. She didn't smile, just placed it in your hand and turned away. You peeled it slowly. The shell flaked. The egg was overcooked, chalky. still warm. You salted it with fingers wet from your mug and ate it in 2 bites. It felt like peace. Across the room, someone passed out. No one moved. He was breathing. That was enough. The door opened for a second. Cold air slipped in. Then the door closed, and the warmth swallowed it. You reached for another piece of bread. Hard as rock, you softened it in ale. It tasted like every piece of bread ever eaten after midnight. Dry, desperate, perfect. You leaned back. The ceiling beams above you were blackened with smoke from 100 winters. Names carved in them. Maybe yours if you stayed long enough. The man beside you muttered something. A story. A confession. You didn't catch the words, but you nodded anyway. He smiled. You passed him a slice of something greasy and gray. He didn't ask. He just ate. There was trust in the tavern. Not deep trust. Not eternal. Just the kind that lived from one sip to the next. The kind you could forget in the morning. Someone lit another candle. The light flickered against mugs and cheeks and wall stains no one had tried to clean. The tavern was alive. Not loud. Just breathing. You drank. You weren't drunk. Not yet. Not fully. You were warm, heavy, settled, and hungry again. So you chewed another piece of sausage, cold from the hearth. You dipped it in mustard someone had made 3 seasons ago. You winced, then smiled. Your hands were sticky. Your lips were dry. Your stomach was confused. But your heart was quiet. That was something. In a world where the day screamed and the cold snapped and the church bells never stopped, silence was rare. But here, in the tavern, between drinks and crumbs and half-remembered songs, you found it. A silence shaped like sleep. You closed your eyes for a second, not to rest, just to listen. Someone was humming. Another was snoring. A knife scraped a board. A mug clinked against teeth. You opened your eyes again. The same, always the same. You didn't need anything else. Outside, the stars turned. Inside, the bread lasted one more bite, and someone poured again. The drink met your lips like an old friend. The crust broke in your hand, and the fire cracked one last time before going low. Midnight was gone, but the night was not. Not yet. Not while there was still food to pass, still mugs to raise, still stories to murmur into the smoke. You stayed until the end, not because of the ale, not because of the meat, but because you didn't want to leave the warmth of shared hunger, of shared forgetfulness, of shared survival. You'd return tomorrow, and the next day. Because in the Middle Ages, the midnight snack wasn't just about food. It was about staying human. Even in the dark, the smell was always better than the taste. Fresh bread, that's what they called it. But in the Middle Ages, fresh meant something different. It meant not moldy enough to refuse. It meant still warm from an oven you didn't see. It meant close enough. You follow the smell down the alley. The baker's door was open. His apron was stained. His hands were covered in flour, or what looked like flour. You didn't ask. He pulled a loaf from the ashes, not from an oven, but from the coals themselves. Black crust, cracked top, smoke still clinging to the edges. He held it out. You paid. It was heavy. That was good. Heavy meant full, meant substance, meant value. You bit in. It crumbled wrong. It chewed like clay. It stuck to your teeth. You kept eating because you were hungry and because bad bread was better than none. But not all bread was bad by accident. Some of it was designed to lie. The bakers had tricks. Everyone knew it. No one talked about it. They stretched the flour, added sand, chalk, crushed bones, sawdust, brick dust, ground up beans, anything to give weight without cost. You'd heard of bakers who mixed white clay with rye to make the color look richer, others who swept their floors, then swept the sweepings into the dough. You heard of one who used powdered sheep hooves, claimed it helped the rise. It didn't, but it added weight. And in the world of bread, weight was everything. You weren't buying taste, you were buying mass. The heavier the loaf, the more you believed in it. And so they tricked you, gave you loaves that looked full, but vanished in the mouth. That crunched wrong. That burned too fast. That made your stomach feel like it had swallowed a rock. And still, you came back. Because what else was there? You didn't own a mill. You didn't grow your own grain. The baker did. Or at least he had access. And so you trusted him, even when you knew not to. There were signs. If the crust flaked too much, if the loaf rang when tapped, if the bottom smelled like ash and the center was raw. But you ignored them, because the baker smiled, and the smell said yes. You once saw a woman buy a loaf, bite it, frown, then hand it to her child anyway. He ate it without complaint. That was bread. It wasn't joy. It was function. It kept your hands busy and your stomach quiet. And sometimes that was all you asked. But the fakers weren't always bakers. Sometimes they were the millers, the ones who ground the grain. They held the real power. They could mix rye with barley, barley with oats, oats with dust. They watered the grind, let stones fall in, let insects pass. No one questioned them, because they had the wheel, the river, the stones that turned, and because the baker blamed the miller, and the miller blamed the grain, and the grain never spoke. So you kept eating. You broke your teeth on pebbles. You coughed on flour that wasn't flour. You swallowed bark and bone and sand. And you said nothing, because the bread was warm, because the crust cracked, because the hunger hurt more, and because sometimes the lie was easier than the truth. You heard of towns where bread was tested. A priest would bless the loaf. If it cracked, it was clean. If it crumbled, it was cursed. You watched this once. The loaf cracked. Everyone cheered. Then someone bit it and bled. They cheered anyway, because people need to believe that the baker cares, that the bread is honest, that the bite will be soft, even when it isn't. Sometimes people fought back. There were riots over bread, small ones, loud ones, fires in front of bakehouses, stones thrown at shutters, angry fists pounding on flour-covered doors. You remembered one, a town where the loaves had grown smaller each week, lighter, paler. Someone sliced one open and found bugs inside, still moving. Someone else bit a loaf and broke a tooth. And that was the end. A crowd formed. They dragged the baker out by his apron. They emptied his baskets into the gutter. They threw his peel into the fire. Someone smashed the oven door. He swore he used clean flour. No one cared. For a week, no one baked. People ate porridge, roots, scraps, anything but bread. Then a new baker appeared, and the loaves returned. No one asked where the old one went. In some cities there were laws, the assize of bread, old words carved into old wood, nailed to walls few could read. They set the price, the weight, the punishment. Sell a light loaf, fined. Sell a foul loaf, flogged. Sell a deadly one, hanged. That was the law. But laws were slow. Bread was fast. And so the fakers stayed one step ahead. They learned to hide the tricks. They filled the center with clean dough and packed the crust with waste. They soaked stale loaves in milk to soften them. They rubbed ashes into the bottom to mimic oven burns. They smiled. They sold. You bought. Because even when the truth burned your tongue, the lie filled your belly. And what else mattered? You knew a baker once, honest man. He used pure flour, clean water, fresh yeast. His bread was dense, dry, honest. No one bought it. They said it was too hard, too plain, too expensive. He started adding sawdust, just a pinch. Sales improved. He added more. One day, his bread caught fire in someone's hearth. They called it cursed. He left the village. The next baker added chalk instead. No one complained, because it looked whiter. Whiter meant cleaner. Cleaner meant better, even when it wasn't. That was the secret. The trick wasn't in the flour. It was in the story. Tell people the loaf is noble, and they'll forgive the grit. Tell them it's blessed, and they'll ignore the smell. Tell them it's new, and they won't remember the old. You watched it happen. Week after week. Mouths full of lies. Stomachs full of dirt. But hearts full of something else. Hope, maybe, that tomorrow's loaf would be better, that next week's dough would rise cleaner, that someone, somewhere, still knew how to bake. And maybe they did. Somewhere. In the hills, perhaps, a widow still kneaded by hand, still sang to her yeast, still fed the fire with pine, not dung. You never tasted her bread, but you believed in it, because belief made the crust softer, the bite warmer, the weight heavier. Even if your teeth still ached, even if your throat scratched, you ate, and you swallowed, and you returned. Because in the Middle Ages, bread was never just food. It was a bargain between trust and hunger, between truth and convenience, between what you knew and what you needed. And in the end, you always chose need. The first thing you noticed was the smell. It came before the merchant, before the cart, before the shouting. A cloud of clove, cinnamon, pepper, something sharper underneath. Something like fire, something like sugar trying to hide smoke. He appeared through the dust, wrapped in cloth the color of mud. His cart squeaked. His boots crunched dry earth. But the jars shimmered, small glass containers with golden lids, pouches tied with red string, a box that smelled like paradise. He was selling spice. Not food, not necessity. Spice. And everyone wanted it, even if they couldn't afford it, even if they didn't know what to do with it, even if it burned their mouths and emptied their pockets. Spice meant more than flavor. It meant wealth. It meant power. It meant distance. Because spices came from far away, from lands no one had seen, from ships that vanished, from caravans that never returned. Or so they said. You watched him open a jar. Saffron, he said, real, red gold threads like dried blood, worth more than silver, worth more than a pig. A woman gasped. A man reached for his purse. He held it higher. This much, he said, could color a pot of rice. This much could save a marriage. This much could cure a cough, drive out a demon, make a widow young again. You didn't believe him, but you wanted to, so you bought a pinch. Later, at home, you dropped it in boiling water. It turned yellow, then brown. You tasted it. Nothing, just bitterness. Later, someone told you it wasn't saffron at all, just dried petals, dyed with lye. You weren't surprised, because this was spice, and spice was a lie. You learned to tell the signs. Real pepper burned the nose. Fake pepper crumbled like dirt. Real cinnamon snapped clean. Fake cinnamon bent. Real ginger stained your fingers. Fake ginger disappeared in stew. But most people couldn't tell. They didn't care. They wanted the name, not the taste. You saw it everywhere. Powdered stone sold as nutmeg. Shaved bark sold as cinnamon. Charcoal mixed with pepper to make it stretch. horsehair shredded and dyed to mimic saffron strands. Even salt, pure, white, common salt, was cut with crushed glass to make it sparkle. They said it helped digestion. It didn't, but it helped the merchant sell faster. And that was what mattered, because spice moved fast. By cart, by foot, by rumor. Every house wanted it. Every stew needed it, to cover the rot, to hide the sour, to make old meat taste new. And if it failed, you added more. You drowned the truth in fire and perfume and told yourself it was delicious. You watched a cook once empty 3 jars into a pot that stank of fish. She didn't flinch, just stirred and served and smiled. That was the thing about spice. It made people trust again, even when they shouldn't. You heard of a lord who bought a sack of cloves. He sprinkled them in wine, in stew, in porridge. He stuffed them in pillows. He burned them to perfume the air. And still, his guests whispered that it smelled like vinegar, because they weren't cloves, just carved roots soaked in vinegar and dried in sun. He never knew. His cook did. She didn't say a word. She just added honey and served. You once traded a heel of bread for a pinch of something called dragon spice. It sparkled in the sun, red and gold. The merchant promised it cured everything. You tasted it. Sand. Plain, warm sand with oil and dye. Your tongue went numb. You laughed. You used it anyway. Sprinkled it on broth. The broth still tasted like boiled bone, but the color distracted the eyes. And sometimes that was enough, because spice didn't need to taste good. It needed to mean something. It needed to signal importance, to say, I had the coin, to whisper, this stew is worth more than yours. Even when it wasn't. You saw people hoard it, tiny boxes hidden behind clay jars, wrapped in cloth, tucked in floorboards, never opened, just possessed, because owning spice was status, and sharing it was power. But fakers knew this, and they leaned in. They sold stories more than flavor. Straight from the east, they said. Blessed by monks, they added. Carried by moonlight. You saw a man crush beetles for red dye. He soaked dried leaves in the color and called it saffron. It smelled like death. People paid him in chickens. You saw children gathering bark from a graveyard tree. They scraped it clean, rolled it into curls. A woman bought 10 bundles and called it cinnamon. No one corrected her, because no one wanted the truth. You heard about spice guilds, merchants who swore to purity, seals stamped in wax, oaths signed in salt. But the further from the port, the weaker the promise. And your village was far, so you trusted smell and color and luck. You learned to judge by how it stuck to your fingers, how it clung to bread, how it survived boiling. And when it didn't, you blamed your cooking, not the spice, because doubt was expensive and pretending was cheaper. Still, not all spice was fake. Sometimes you got lucky. A friend came back from the coast. He brought a pouch of real pepper, sharp, black, alive. You ground it slow, added it to soup. It lifted the entire room. No one spoke, just ate, slow, careful, grateful. For a moment the world tasted new. That pouch lasted 3 weeks. Then it was gone, and you went back to dust. But you remembered, and that memory flavored everything after. Even the lies, even the ash, even the bitter root soaked in wine. It all tasted closer to something real, because you knew the difference, and because knowing was its own kind of wealth. They looked harmless. Little things, bright things, rolled in sugar, dipped in honey, glazed with syrup so thick it shone like glass. Children stared at them with wide eyes. Adults too, though they pretended not to, because sweetness was rare, and danger didn't always come with a warning. The first bite was always the same, sticky, warm, a rush behind the teeth, then a pause, then the chewing, then, sometimes, a wince, because not all sweets were kind. Some were made with honey gone sour, honey stored too long, honey that grew things. Others were dipped in syrups, boiled with metal pots scraped thin, a bit of copper, a trace of lead. You didn't taste it at first, but your stomach remembered. You saw a boy once eat a lump of sugar dipped in something red. He smiled. Then he slept for 2 days. They said it was just sleep, but he never looked the same after. There were candies rolled in chalk to keep them from sticking, others soaked in vinegar to make them bite. Some dyed with powders that weren't meant for mouths. The market didn't care. Sweets sold fast. A woman with no teeth still bought them for the smell. A man with a cough swore licorice cured his lungs. A priest claimed cinnamon soaked in wine brought visions. You once ate a cake that sparkled. The baker said it had angel dust. You found out later it was powdered glass, but it crunched beautifully. You kept eating. There were almond balls made with no almonds, just flour, oil, something bitter. You didn't ask. They were sweet. That was enough, because sugar was currency, more rare than gold, more craved than meat. And where sugar didn't reach, honey stood in, sticky, wild, unfiltered, pulled from hives hidden in tree trunks. Sometimes bees came with it. You bought a jar once. The lid buzzed. You left it in the dark. The buzzing stopped. You stirred it into porridge anyway. The sweetness covered everything, even the fear. You heard stories of cakes baked for weddings that made half the guests sick, of tarts filled with dates soaked in spoiled wine, of sugared plums that hid worms beneath their shine. But people still ate, because sweetness was forgiveness, a soft blanket over a bitter day, a reward that melted before it could be questioned. You once saw a girl bite into a candy shaped like a flower. She gasped. It was beautiful. Then she coughed for hours. The petals were dyed with copper, to make the red deeper, to make the buyers believe. They always believed. There were ginger lozenges wrapped in paper soaked in oil, peppermint coins kept in jars that never closed, boiled sugar sticks broken with rocks and sucked until lips bled. Children lined up for them, traded chores for them, cried when they dropped them, and every seller swore theirs were clean, pure, good. But sweet didn't mean safe. Some added alum. It made things firmer, sharper, more dangerous. Others dusted pastries with lime powder to make the crusts crack. You tasted one once. It cut your mouth. You kept eating, because pain was part of it. A sting on the tongue meant it was working, meant it was real, meant it wasn't just a dream. In feast halls they built sugar sculptures, towers, swans, castles. None meant to be eaten, but someone always tried. You watched a man bite the wing of a sugar dove. His tooth cracked. He spat blood, then laughed, because it was worth it. There were pies served at royal tables with fillings dyed to glow, oranges that bled green, cherries blackened for effect, custards stiffened with wax to keep their shape through song and speech and toasts. You saw one fall from a plate, bounce, and roll. Someone picked it up and ate it. The show had to go on. In the villages, sweets were smaller, more humble, still dangerous. Bread soaked in honey left out too long, turned sour, but still eaten. Berries candied in jars with cracked seals, flies trapped inside, still scooped. Because sugar was memory, of better days, of fair days, of one good moment to carry through the bad. A woman once gave you a slice of cake wrapped in cloth. No occasion, just a gift. You bit in. It was dry, The fruit inside tasted old. The sugar had crystallized, but it was sweet, and you remembered it more than any feast because it was given without reason and eaten without regret. Later, you heard the cake had been made with bad flour, with lard gone sour, with something that made people sleep. The whole family napped through supper. No one died, but no one remembered what came after, except you. You remembered the sweetness and the silence, because in the end, medieval sweets were just like medieval life, rough, risky, and still, occasionally beautiful. You could smell the fare before you saw it. Spice, smoke, sweat, oil that had been used too many times, something sweet, something burning. The crowd was already thick. Children with sticky fingers, dogs sniffing at scraps, vendors shouting louder than the music, and everywhere, food, wrapped in cloth, stuck on sticks, piled in baskets, glazed, greased, glowing. No time to sit, no tables, just walking, chewing, wiping your mouth with your sleeve. The first bite came from a sausage, or something shaped like one, charred on the outside, soft in the center, hot enough to burn your lip. But you didn't stop. You never stopped at the fair. Next, a flat cake, fried, folded, filled with onions. Too much salt, not enough flour. But it held together. You dipped it in something red, regretted it instantly, licked your fingers anyway. Then came the bread, brittle, dipped in oil so old it coughed. The crust flaked like old paint. You still finished it, because the fair wasn't about taste. It was about now. Food wasn't served. It was shouted, thrown, grabbed, paid for with coins, favors, promises. You passed a boy roasting beetles on a knife, a girl selling boiled eggs with black shells, a man tossing candied roots into a crowd and laughing when people fought for them. You fought too. You caught one, bit into it. It was cold, too hard. You still smiled. Someone handed you a drink. You didn't ask what it was. It fizzed on your tongue, then numbed it. You kept walking. A vendor smashed something on a stone. Fruit? Grain? He scooped it into leaves, poured honey over it, handed it out in handfuls. You chewed. It stuck to your teeth. You swallowed without tasting. Another stall. Fried cheese wrapped in flour, half cooked, still bubbling. You burned your tongue, laughed, ate the rest. That was the fare. Fast food meant fast decisions. No time to ask, no time to complain. Just bite and move. The smells piled high. Meat, molasses, fat, mud. You didn't know what half of it was, didn't care. Because at the fair, hunger wasn't about the stomach. It was about the rhythm. Bite, step, bite, step. Your hands never stayed clean. Your lips never stayed dry. And your coin purse emptied faster than your appetite. You saw a man drop a loaf of bread, pick it up, brush off the dirt, and sell it again. The buyer never noticed or didn't care. You saw another stir soup with a bone still dripping mud. He charged extra if you wanted it warm. Most didn't. The clever ones didn't even cook. They sold air, scented steam from boiling herbs. You paid to stand near it, to inhale, to imagine the flavor. That was enough. Then there were the real tricks. Stones baked into pies to give them weight. Meat stretched with root and skin and flour. Sweets coated in sugar that tasted like ash. You once bought a pie that crunched wrong. It bled dark juice. The vendor smiled. You didn't finish it. But someone did. There were rumors, always, of travelers who fell sick, of children who vanished after a drink too sweet, of meats that didn't come from animals. No one said it aloud. You kept eating. The fair pulsed. You tasted everything. Boiled, grain wrapped in cabbage, fried fat rolled in oats, mushroom paste shaped into coins, all of it fast, all of it forgettable, all of it perfect. Because you weren't here for nutrition. You were here for noise, for smoke, for the joy of chewing something you didn't have to name. By sundown, your hands were slick, your face sticky, your breath a mix of garlic and something burnt. You felt full, but empty, because the fare didn't feed you. Not really. It distracted you. From the field, from the cold, from the ache in your ribs and the hole in your boots. It let you pretend, just for a day, that life was full, that the world had flavor, that the hunger inside you could be fooled. And maybe, for a moment, it was. You bought one last thing, a flat cake sprinkled with dust that glittered. You didn't ask what it was. You didn't care. You took a bite. It tasted like nothing. You smiled anyway, because nothing, wrapped in sweetness, was still something. And that was the best the fare could offer. It was never the first bite that stayed with you. It was the last. Cold, quiet, forgotten. A crust at the bottom of a bowl, a spoonful of stew gone gray, the heel of bread left behind after a fight. Leftovers were part of life, not waste, not shame, just what was left when the feast ended. And in the Middle Ages, nothing was wasted, not when hunger waited at the door, not when work never stopped. You saw women boil bones for days, saw them scrape pots with flat stones, saw them gather crumbs like treasure. One man collected used stew, not spoiled, just tired. He added wine, herbs, boiled it again, served it in a cup and called it second broth. It sold, because it was hot, and because heat covered 1,000 sins. Another sold pies made only of leftovers, meat from yesterday, sauce from last week, crust from anywhere. He never admitted what was inside. No one asked. They ate, because leftovers told stories, of meals that came before, of guests who had gone, of laughter that had cooled. You once ate a cake so dry it crumbled in your hands. The woman who gave it to you said it was from her wedding, 12 years ago. You didn't believe her, but you chewed anyway. It tasted like dust and joy. Some said old bread was sacred, hard enough to break a tooth, but blessed, dipped in milk, dipped in wine, dipped in silence. You saw a monk save crusts in a cloth pouch. He fed birds with them. He said it was a prayer. You believed him. Then there were the legends of a soup that never ended, a pot that boiled for 50 winters. Every night more water, more roots, more bones. It never emptied and never tasted the same twice. You heard of a cheese that grew legs, left the cellar, returned 3 days later, stronger. You tasted it once. It hummed. Someone once found a pie under a floorboard, wrapped in cloth, still warm. They said it whispered when opened. You didn't ask for a slice, but you never forgot the smell, because some leftovers didn't just survive. They changed. They aged. They became something else, something more, something dangerous. And still, people ate, because time didn't erase hunger. It only seasoned it. You remembered a man who never finished his meals. He always left something, a crust, a slice, a smear. Said it was for the ghosts. Said they got hungry too. No one laughed, not in that village. Some people believed old food held memory. The longer it sat, the more it knew. They spoke to bread before eating it, thanked the porridge, blessed the soup. You didn't understand. Then you ate a biscuit found at the bottom of a sack, hard as stone, tasted like dust and pine. And suddenly you remembered your father's voice. Just a sound, a shape, a warmth in the throat. You didn't finish the biscuit. You wrapped it in cloth and kept it. Some foods were never meant to be eaten twice, but some stayed with you. There was a woman who collected food no one finished. Bits of cheese, bits of pie, the last spoonfuls. She pressed them together, layer by layer, into something new. She called it her memory loaf. She sliced it only on winter nights, served it to no one, just herself, by the fire. You tasted it once. She let you. It was strange, sharp, sweet, sour, warm in places, cold in others. You asked her why she made it. She said, "So I don't forget who I was hungry with." You nodded. You never forgot her face. Leftovers weren't just scraps. They were proof that something had been shared, that someone had cooked, that someone had cared, even for a moment. And when hunger came again, as it always did, those scraps whispered, "You were full once. You will be again." That mattered, more than freshness, more than flavor. Even the worst bread, chewed in silence with someone beside you, became holy. You saw two children find a crust in the dirt. They split it without words. A bird watched them, didn't move. Even the bird understood, because nothing alive wastes a meal. Not truly. Not when food is memory. Not when taste is tied to faces, to firelight, to stories. You sat once at a table where everyone brought their own leftover, each one different, each one precious, all warmed in the same pot. The stew was terrible, but no one said so. They called it everything soup, and it made them laugh, long after the bowls were empty. You knew then the junk food, the scraps, the burned edges, the cold grease. They weren't about taste. They were about life, about what clings to your hands when everything else is gone, about what stays with you when the feast fades. So you chewed and remembered and swallowed and waited for morning.